I've previously written about the misconceptions that all societies believed that the earth was flat. Most Europeans did believe this, but a few Europeans were involved with societies who believed that the earth was round, considered one of the greatest secrets of all time, and solely for the survival of those societies. If found out, they would have been put to death for heresy. These beliefs were not acceptable within the Holy Roman Empire. Countries would close their borders in order to hide trade secrets and retain their values as well as their traditions. Japan was a good example of this. They did not allow foreigners into their country until the United States forced them to open their borders. Alchemists, astronomers, and philosophers hid their secrets of chemical compounds and experimentation. These ideas were thought of as devil worship and witchcraft to many. Elites, nobles, and even royalty, though, would send their children to learn these things. One of the first inventions that was ever created was the Accolade, and it was invented by Hypatia, a woman who was eventually killed by Christians, who drug her into the streets of Alexandria. She was then dismembered and her body burned in the middle of the street. She was accused of being a witch, and the temple of Luxor was desecrated. For the sake of science, Alexandria condoned dissection of their dead, and to Christians this was appalling. Old pagan relics were taken out of Egyptian temples and destroyed, only to be replaced with Christian symbols instead. Alexandria was burned to the ground also, after a long, disastrous riot occurred, all caused by one man's desire for power, and religion was his way of gaining that power. The Accolade for some time after was considered to be witchcraft to many, but as time went by, people realized it was a way in which to navigate. In the Fourth Crusade, the Byzantine Empire was attacked by the Holy Roman Empire. Later they fell to the Ottomans, and in both cases, Venice reaped the rewards. Craftsmen, glassworkers fled from Constantinople, eventually settling in Venice, and Venetian glass was born. Fearing that fire would burn down the wooden buildings in Venice, all glass production moved to Murano. Travel was restricted for craftsmen, and they were not allowed to leave. They were given special privileges. Unlike other citizens of Venice, glassmakers were allowed to carry swords and had immunity from prosecution. Murano glassmakers became the most prominent citizens of Venice. The Venetians did their best to keep the craft within the borders of Venice, too. As time went on, though, the secret of Venetian glass spread to the surrounding cities as the glassmakers eventually were able to escape, taking their craft secrets with them to wherever they went. The Voynich Manuscript was discovered near Rome, an old manuscript that has yet to be deciphered, and still a mystery to scientists. Carbon dating placed the manuscript's time of being written at about 200 years after Roger Bacon. His name, though, was found within the manuscript, but was not a part of the original writing. The manuscript was also written well after his death. After examining what was found, scientists determined that it could very well be the best coded manuscript of all time. Scientists, military code breakers, and the best technology that society has cannot decipher even one page. The Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, has used copies of the manuscript as an exercise. Not one agent has so far been able to decipher any of the manuscript either. Some have tried to link the Voynich to John Dee and Roger Bacon, but nothing indicates that either had anything to do with the manuscript. John Dee was not even alive yet, according to the carbon date, but he did take interest in creating his own language. This is what probably brought John Dee into this matter. In historical, Roger Bacon has been linked to things that he had no part in. The manuscript is filled with a strange, unfamiliar language that cannot be read. It has pictures of plants and half-naked women that are holding hands. It has also been suggested that whoever created the manuscript had access to telescopes and microscopes as well. There are images that resemble cells and our galaxy within the manuscript. The amount of money that it would have took in order to create a manuscript dissuades some scholars from believing that it is a fraud. No person would have spent that much money in order to commit a hoax. Looking at the book seriously seems to be taboo for most scholars today because old conspiracies, secret societies, and folklores from the past. There are also many other transcripts too that scholars will not look at that should be reviewed and findings made. Even for a scientific point of view, historically, the possibilities should be considered. Robert Hooke himself was despised for the use of ciphers and even accused of stealing from fellow scientists. This too was when Hooke held the position of curator of experiments for the Royal Society when it first formed. Secrecy did not only covet knowledge that was withheld from the people. Within the Holy Roman Empire, there were also societies within a society. The Wesselini Conspiracy opposed the treaty between the Ottomans and the Holy Roman Empire and was one of these societies. Within this conspiracy was the Teutonic Knights, Order of the Golden Fleece, and Holy Crown of Hungary. Members of the Order of the Golden Fleece who were not of royal blood were forbidden from being members of other orders. The Teutonic Knights had been expelled from various countries, requiring secrecy concerning their activities within certain places of Europe. Conspiracies allowed these organizations to work together, where in the open they could not. Marriages were performed according to religious beliefs in order to form alliances, and hostages were taken to show a person's loyalty towards the leader they served. Counter-referendum movements were used as strategies in order to save people that failed in their efforts of rebellion. Members of orders were put on trial by their own members, and hostages were also kept by the members too. Francis Bacon was with Queen Elizabeth's. Francis Bacon was Queen Elizabeth's James Bond, whose story was shrouded with mystery. He was a spy, politician, ambassador, writer, scientist, and man of law. There were even rumors that he could have even been Elizabeth's son as well. Orville Ward Owen claimed that he had found hidden ciphers within Shakespeare's plays, proving that Bacon was actually Shakespeare. Traveled to England, Owen searched the banks of the River Thame, believing that the original plays of Shakespeare were hidden there. With no proof found, Orville Ward Owen eventually was discredited, with his fortune squandered. On his deathbed, he said that nobody should ever become interested in the subject whatsoever. Virginia Fellows found his cipher in an old Detroit warehouse and wrote the Shakespeare Code, which was printed after her death in 2006. When Mark Twain traveled to England, he also researched Shakespeare and found compelling evidence. Mark Twain discovered that Shakespeare only had a 7th grade education. In England during those times, only law students from one college in London knew law. Not only was Shakespeare not a student of the school, but not once in his life did he receive any mail, nor are there any manifests that show that he had ever left England by ship. When he died, no plays were left to family members or mentioned in his will. His family died with mysterious and insane stories about homosexuality involved. Shakespeare disinherited his oldest daughter because her husband was arrested for sodomy. His other daughter died before she could get his money, and Shakespeare only left his wife their wedding bed. Putting Bacon's work next to Shakespeare, you can see they both did a lot on their own. But what if it wasn't just a work of one man? Shakespeare could have been written by many writers under the same pen name, which was commonly practiced back then. Revolution was in the air, and later in history Milton, John Locke, and many others were influenced by the writings of Shakespeare. Whoever wrote these plays understood Voynich law, resulting in the Voynich death skull with the words to be or not to be. How could a man know about Voynich law during that time if he never traveled to Germany? During the end of Francis Bacon's life, his political career came to an end. He was arrested on charges of bribery. While in custody, threats were also made about adding boogery to the charges. This term was used for sodomy and included homosexual acts, the same charge that Shakespeare's son-in-law was supposedly charged with.